For this assignment, we will be applying the blending paint application and practicing creating soft edges. We will be working wet into wet. You will begin with a detailed photo of a wave. Start by drawing in the major forms using your Vine charcoal. As you begin to paint, start with the darkest values you see. Generally, you want to approach the painting by working from dark to light. As you begin to layer in your gray and lighter values, you can begin to soften the edges between values. Blend the edges together, eliminating the hard edges of the darker shapes. Gradually work on the blending wet into wet as you go. Okay, we are taking a moment to pause the time lapse to just go over part of the technique here, which is blending edges. So I'm going to show that in here, just kind of slowed down so I can talk about it a little bit more. So I've started by putting in some of the darker shapes first. You can see that in the time lapse. Now I'm going to start to layer in more of these gray values, and I'll be putting the lighter, brighter white values kind of on top of that. Okay, so first I'm just putting down some of my paint layers, and I'm putting this paint in really edge to edge. So I have this wet shape, and then I'm putting this wet shape in, and the edges are going right next to each other. Okay. So kind of establishing that. And now I can go in, and I'm taking some of the paint off of my brush. Okay. And I'm gonna go into these where these edges are, and I'm gonna start to soften it with my brush. So I'm blending that wet paint from one section of the painting into the wet paint in another section. I can also go in with this dabbing motion. These short little dabbing motions, and that's going to soften these edges and blend this paint together. And I'm taking the excess paint off of my brush with my paper towel. Because if your brush is really packed if it gets packed with a lot of paint, it's just going to start putting down that value. What I'm trying to do is blend the paint that is there and to soften up these edges. So we're applying that idea of blending that we first tried in our value skills. Now we're starting to apply that into a painting. So you're going to be experimenting with blending these areas together. Sort of seeing how soft you can get it. Okay, so it's going to be important that you have your paper towel ready, that you're getting that excess paint off. I'm also adding, I'm also making sure that as I'm putting paint down, for this to work, it's wet into wet paint, right? So the paint, as you're putting it down, has to be fairly fluid. If it's going on the surface and it's really dry, you need to add more medium into your paint mixture. So let's actually take a moment and look at my palette, and you can see how I'm adding the medium in. Here is a quick view of my palette. So I'm going and I'm getting some paint, putting it over here, getting some of this medium and dabbing it into my brush. Before I go on to the painting, I'm smoothing it out on the palette with my brush. I'm really mixing that paint and the medium together. So make sure you're doing that as you go if your paint is feeling too dry. Always have a bit of medium out. You're just dabbing some of that in and getting it into the paint. In the final stages of this practice painting, see where you can reestablish some dark areas.
Squint at your photo reference to see the values clearly. Blend the paint together wet into wet, and be sure to clean off your brush as you go with a paper towel. In some areas of intense light, you can build up the paint thicker and have a few hard edges among the blended paint.